knocking on my door.
Cheerful, outgoing, and friendly. That's how friends and family described young Timothy Pitzen. And just hearing the way that they talk about him, it's clear to me that Timothy was a good kid. A good kid with a sick mother.
6-year-old Timothy Pitzen of Illinois disappeared Friday. He was last seen leaving a Wisconsin-Dells water park with his mother. No one has seen Timothy since.
Her name was Amy Fry Pitzen, and her life had been plagued by the relentless effects of severe depression. The illness grew as one divorce turned to two, and two turned to three. At one point, Amy had even attempted to take her own life, but was ultimately unsuccessful. It wasn't an easy life for her, but in the early 2000s, things were starting to finally look up. Amy met a man named Jim Pitzen, and obviously, based off of the last name, they got married. And together they had Timothy, a child who would instantly become the light of Amy's life. Amy's heart was with Timothy. She even added an extra M to his name to, quote, make him more special. The bond the two shared was seemingly very strong. But elsewhere in her life, her marriage with Jim was becoming anything but. The two began fighting constantly, and their once loving relationship began to cool down and take a turn for the worst. The fighting had got to the point where Amy became sure that her fourth divorce was imminent. But see, this is where the problem arose for Amy. Given her long track record with failing relationships and her history with mental illness, it wouldn't take an expert to realize that Amy was likely not going to get custody of the then 6-year-old Timothy, meaning that her true source of happiness, the child she held and loved so dearly, would be taken from her. A little before 8 a.m. on May 11th, 2011, Jim dropped Timothy off at school and watched as he ran towards his kindergarten teacher, his Spider-Man backpack swaying side to side. He drove off like any other day, not knowing that this would be the last time he'd ever see his son. When he came to pick Timothy up at the end of the day, he was told that he had already left. Just 30 minutes upon arriving at school, Amy came to pick Timothy up, claiming that there was a family emergency and that Timmy had to leave quickly. Jim knew nothing about it because there was no family emergency. Amy had lied. He tried calling her, but the phone went straight to voicemail. She had seemingly dropped off of the map, leaving Jim and others to wonder where they had gone. Jim was worried and obviously confused, but ultimately he trusted Amy enough to know that she wasn't going to hurt the son that she loved so much. As friends and family wondered and worried about the now missing pair, the two had driven to Illinois and were seemingly on an innocent, spur-of-the-moment vacation. Over the next few days, Amy took Timothy on a trip to a water park, a zoo, and a nice resort, 3 locations that were all captured on CCTV footage. Along the way, Amy had bought Timothy candy and toys, and honestly the whole situation is like a dream for a 6-year-old. Skipping school, getting candy, getting toys, going to a water park. I mean, from a distance, it seemed like Timothy was a lucky kid. At one point, the pair traveled to Wisconsin, where Amy had even called Jim's brother and told him that Timothy was safe. She also added that Timothy was hers, and only hers. After this, she called her own mother and repeated that Timothy was in fact safe. During this call, Timothy could be heard in the background on multiple occasions, including once when he had complained about being hungry. Same though. The strangest detail to come from these calls was the fact that she had never tried to call her own husband, but yet she called his brother. Things were clearly off, and they were only going to get more confusing. At roughly 10 a.m., the pair checked out of their hotel in Wisconsin on May 13th. While in the lobby, CCTV footage captured the two at the front desk. And it's frustrating to watch. Such a young kid with full trust in his mother, likely not thinking anything of the situation that they were in. Seeing this footage is tough, because the mother knew what was soon to happen, but Timothy was innocently clueless. That night, Amy was seen on CCTV footage walking into a Family Dollar store in Winnebago. There she bought paper, pens, and envelopes. But missing from the scene was Timothy. This was the first time throughout their trip that she had been captured on camera without the boy, but it wouldn't be the last. She then went to purchase food from another store in Winnebago, again without the company of Timothy. She went unseen by cameras for a few hours after, until eventually she checked into a hotel in Rockford. She booked a room for one, and it was alone in that hotel room where Amy Pitzen died. On the morning of May 14th, 2011, her body was found in her hotel room. Deep gashes marked both of her wrists and her neck. Her blood revealed that she had also consumed a potentially lethal amount of antihistamines. And whichever killed her first, one thing was obvious. Amy Pitzen had committed suicide. And as is usually the case, Amy left behind a note. And in it she said sorry to her loved ones for causing this mess. She also said that Timothy was safe, but she added the chilling statement that he would never be found. Another note was sent to her mother, which echoed the sentiment that Timothy had been taken someplace safe and that he would be cared for years and years. She also added that Timothy says he loves you. The case gained national attention due to its shocking and disturbing nature. People watched in disbelief as they heard the story play out on their televisions. The whole world was now seemingly wondering what happened to Timothy. This was a question that would not be answered anytime soon. Days into the search turned to weeks, then months, then years. Every once in a while, someone would claim to see the young boy in a park or in a restaurant, but none of the claims ever turned out to be substantial. And the case that once had all eyes in America on it had quickly become generally forgotten by the masses as they clung to the next big news story. The hopes of finding Timothy became lower and lower as the years rolled on, and by the time 2019 rolled around, many assumed the case to be hopeless. But not Jim. He believed that his son was in fact out there and that he was in good hands. He also believed that he would one day be reunited with Timothy and that the case would finally be solved. Some called him crazy. I would call him patient. And it seemed like his patience was about to pay off.
A boy at a Cincinnati hospital tells authorities he is Timothy Pitzen. That sent police into action back here in Aurora, Illinois.
Jim got a call in early April of 2019 that stated that a young boy claiming to be Timothy had been found. The boy claimed that he had escaped from the hands of two kidnappers who held him hostage for over 7 years. Once escaping their grasp, he said he ran and he ran and he ran until eventually being discovered. For a moment, Jim felt bliss. His son had been found. After all these years, his relentless efforts to find Timothy had finally paid off, and the case was solved. DNA tests were administered to the battered and scared child as a precautionary measure to prove that he was telling the truth. The tests quickly came back, and they came back with shocking news. The 14-year-old boy was not Timothy. His name was in fact Brian Reaney, and even more shockingly, he wasn't 14. But rather, he was 23 years old. The 23-year-old Reaney was a convicted felon who had lied about his identity in the past. In this case, he had watched a television special on Timothy Pitzen and decided to impersonate the kid. Whatever his twisted motives were for this hoax don't even matter at this point. The blow this must have dealt to Jim must have been unimaginable. Insult to injury almost. Salt on the wound. His life was controlled by this case, and it was finally about to be solved with a happy resolution. But now he had to face the pain of not knowing all over again. This was the last major news from this case, and to this day, Timothy has not been seen or heard from, and the case remains open. As is typically the case with most strange disappearances, a number of theories have been circulating around as to what may have happened to Timothy. And it seems like the most plausible one right now is murder. Upon police examination of Amy's vehicle, they were able to find an unsettling amount of blood throughout her car, blood that belonged to Timothy. This, along with Amy's sporadic actions and unfit mental state, has led many to believe that Amy had in fact murdered her own son. In her suicide note, when she writes that Timothy was safe with people he loved and that he'd never be found, people take this as meaning that Timothy was now in heaven with other loved ones who had passed. Upon further examination of her vehicle, it was determined that the car had been parked in a grassy area, possibly near a stream. Perhaps this suggests that after Timothy had killed Timothy, she dumped his body in the woods in a spot that she was sure that no one would ever check. This whole theory would also explain why Timothy was inexplicably not with his mother for the majority of her final day. Perhaps she had committed the crime en route to Rockford. This would also explain why Amy had taken Timothy to all these cool places and gotten him all that nice stuff. Perhaps she was making his final days the best of his life. Knowing what we know about this case, I understand why this is the most popular theory. I agree with the notion that this is certainly the most likely theory, and that there is a very good chance that this is exactly what happened. However, once you dig a little deeper, there is still a lot of evidence that casts doubt on the theory itself. For starters, Timothy was Amy's one source of happiness. He was everything to her, and I get that she was depressed, but that doesn't just make you kill the one that you love the most. I mean, depression doesn't just make you a murderer, so why would she kill Timothy? I mean, every murder has a motive, and I just don't see one in this case. And at this point, she certainly wasn't under the influence of everything, because she was driving around and walking normally into stores just hours later. So it clearly wasn't done in some kind of drug-induced rage or anything like that. And the fact that she loved him so much makes it hard to believe that she had just planned this murder out and actually went through with it. So is it even really possible that she could have murdered him? Also, as for the blood in her car, this was later revealed to have likely been from one of Timothy's frequent nosebleeds. He had gotten a bad one in the car just weeks before his disappearance, which authorities now believe had caused the blood that they had found in the car. And despite all the police investigations into the hotels that they stayed at and the crime scene where Amy had killed herself, no evidence of murder was ever found. The only piece of true evidence to support this was the fact that Amy had changed her clothes after leaving the hotel where Timothy was last seen. This set of clothes was never seen again. So at the end of the day, we have a really strong theory here, and despite its many flaws, it's still possible that this was in fact what happened. But I certainly can't say with 100% certainty that Amy murdered Timothy, and for that reason, we have to explore some other theories. Buried in the suicide note and forgotten by most was the fact that Amy had mentioned how she didn't want to risk Timothy being hurt by Jim because of her choices. This is something that really jumped out to me because it implies something incredibly dark. First of all, why would she just assume that Jim would hurt Timothy? Perhaps this suggests that Jim was actually abusive towards him, and she feared that taking her life would fill him with even more rage. I mean, she wouldn't just assume Jim would hurt Timothy if he didn't have a history of abuse, right? I mean, that's not just something that you could assume that he would just randomly start doing out of the blue. So perhaps this is why Amy never called Jim, because he might not have been the man that we thought. But digging even deeper, let's look into the second part of her statement. Because of her choices. Sure, this could mean her choice to take her own life and to take Timothy on this random trip, but why would this translate into Timothy being hurt? These were Amy's actions, and there's no way that it could be spun around and blamed on a 6-year-old child. This has led many to believe that there was more to this statement. Some believe that this statement implies that Amy had actually cheated on Jim, and that Timothy was not actually Jim's son. And perhaps she felt that if Jim were to ever find out about the choices she made to cheat on him, that he would hurt the both of them. Or maybe he just wouldn't be able to handle the pain of being lied to. So it's possible that Amy discovered that Timothy was in fact not Jim's child, and that she panicked and caused this whole ordeal. And maybe she ended up taking Timothy to his actual father, who is now raising him in secrecy. I know this one is a bit out there, but there's one thing that really sticks out in my mind when I hear this, and that is this. When Amy and Jim met, Jim was battling Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was luckily able to beat the disease, but not without the help of chemotherapy. But a nasty side effect of this treatment is typically infertilization for men. So when Jim was later able to have a child with Amy, they viewed it as a miracle. But perhaps it wasn't a miracle at all. Perhaps it was someone else's child. So to recap this theory, some believe that Amy had gotten pregnant with Timothy because of another man, and fearful of what Jim might do when he later finds out, she took Timothy away and had him live in secrecy with his real father. And unable to cope with the mess that she created, Amy had taken her own life. Now to me, this is a theory based purely in speculation that is very interesting, but probably not much more than that. It is quite certainly more of a reach than saying that he was just murdered, but at the end of the day, it's still a possibility, and perhaps bits and pieces of it are true, or perhaps none of it is. But with a case this mysterious, all things have to be considered. Now, this theory is a bit more vague, but it is a popular one among Timothy's remaining family. They believe that Timothy was given up to a kind family who lives in a remote area and that are now homeschooling Timothy and hiding him. I mean, after all, 2011 was a high point for underground adoptions, so it's possible that a family illegally adopted him through Amy. But there's also stranger places that some people believe that he might have gone. Some people believe that Timothy was given up to a remote Amish community and that he is there working and living with a group of people who are now caring for him. Another creepier belief is that Timothy was given up to a cult located in the Wisconsin area near the hotel that the two had stayed at. Now, I couldn't find much information about this supposed cult, but I've heard from a lot of locals that really swear that it is real. Whoever he was given up to, this theory suggests that Timothy is alive and well to this day. And for that reason, I honestly hope that this is the case. I mean, even if he's part of some creepy cult, at least he's alive. And at least there's hope that he can one day be reunited with his father. To this day, neither of the theories discussed have been proven or disproven. And closure seems a long way off for the family of Timothy Pitzen. Perhaps in the future, Timothy will return home to his father with a story to tell. But until then, we'll just have to wait for more answers before we can truly solve the disappearance of Timothy Pitzen.